The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 21st chapter. Jesus began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and leased it to tenants and went to another country for a long time. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants in order that they might give him his share of the produce of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Next, he sent another slave. That one they beat and insulted and sent away empty-handed. And he sent still a third, and this one also they wounded and threw out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they discussed it among themselves and said, "This is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance may be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, "Heaven forbid." But he looked at them and said, "What then does this text mean? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." When the scribes and chief priests realized that he had told this parable against them, they wanted to lay hands on him at that very hour, but they feared the people. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Sisters and brothers in faith, grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. My wife and I, we have a home in Alexandria that we hope to retire to someday. And in the years before retirement, we've kept it furnished and decorated. There are pictures on the walls and hardwood floors covered by nice rugs. And I've taken care of the lawn and the landscaping and maintaining the place. And we think it's, a nice house. Though I admit it would be a lot nicer if I wasn't the one taking care of it. And since we've not retired yet, we rent the place out to college students during the school year. It helps to pay the mortgage and, utilities and things like that. And it's better to have people in the home caring for it than to have it sit empty. The students move in each August, and then they move out each May. And they're usually happy to get out of the cramped dorm or apartment that they've been living in. They cook in our kitchen, sleep in our bed, watch TV in our lazy boys, and generally pretend they're middle-class homeowners as well as college students for the school year. The Bible would call those students stewards. Stewards are people who live in a place that is not their own, making full use of and caring for things that do not belong to them. And there are lots of stewards in the Bible. Abraham had a steward who managed his property. Joseph was a steward of Potiphar in Egypt before that little incident with Potiphar's wife. Later, after he got out of jail and was working for Pharaoh, he had stewards of his own. Jesus told parables about people who had managers in charge of their property, like the parable of the talents and the 3 managers who were given the owner's money to invest in his absence. Or the parable of the dishonest steward who reduced the bills of his master's customers in order to save his own skin. And there are others, lots of them. And some of them were good stewards, and some were bad stewards. Most of the time, the students who rent our place are good stewards. They pay their rent and take care of it as well as 19-year-olds can. Every now and then we get to the house in May and we find that it has been trashed or damaged. One year we found out that there had been several parties at our house so that even the police knew about the place. They were bad stewards, and they did not get their damage deposit back. We, all of us, are stewards, entrusted with caring for all that God has so generously given to us to use. Sometimes stewards forget that they are stewards. They think that the property entrusted to them is actually theirs. In today's reading, Jesus told the men who rented out his vineyard At harvest time, when his servant came to collect the rent, the renters beat him up and didn't pay. Several servants went to collect, same result. The man even sent his son. Surely they'll respect the owner's son. But they kill him in a ridiculous attempt to take his property. And there are lots of things wrong in this story. But the basic problem behind it all is that the stewards think they are owners when they are not. If I were to go to my place next May and find the students had changed all the locks and were planning to live there permanently, well, we'd have to have a little discussion, probably with a lawyer or something. Stewards are not the owners. And one of the deep spiritual problems human beings have, especially in a wealthy country like ours, is that we don't realize that God is only letting us use what still belongs to God. Whether it's our time or our talent or our treasure, it all belongs to God. And our Lord seemed to see that coming in us. Remember, way back in Deuteronomy chapter 7, before Israel had even entered the promised land, God warned them and said, when you enter the land and you prosper, do not say, it's by my power and my hard work that I've gotten this wealth. Remember, it is the Lord your God who gave you this land and who gave you the power to get this wealth. And God is keeping the promise he has made to your ancestors. The truth is, everything we have comes from God and belongs to God. And we will give everything back to God one day. And so I guess there are at least two ways of being in the world. One way is to assume that we are all the owners of all that we have, and the only thing we have to do really is to build bigger barns and sit around and live a life of leisure. Remember how God called the man who did that a fool? Or we can take up our role as stewards, managers of all that God has entrusted to us. And that leads to a very different kind of life, because the very first question a steward asks is not, what do I want to do? But what does the owner want me to do? To be a steward is to have a mission. And stewardship is about so much more than the money we put in the offering plate, although it includes that. Stewardship is everything we do after we say we believe, everything. Stewardship is our faith taking action in the real world. It includes what we do in church, but that's just a small part of our stewardship. It also includes how we use our time and our resources to serve God at home, to serve God at work, to serve God in our community. And likewise, a healthy church is a church that regards itself as a community of stewards rather than as a collection of owners. Because you see, the church is not ours either. It's God's church. And the most important question we ask is not in the church, is not what do we like or what do we want. We ask, what is God's mission for this people in this place? What is God calling us to do? And so whether it's as individuals or as a church, the only question is, what kind of stewards are we going to be? We can be good stewards or we can be bad stewards. But we cannot be anything else but stewards. Because we are not the owners. And one day, we will all give everything back to the Lord and owner who entrusted it to us. So, what kind of stewards do we want to be? One of my favorite stories in Luke, you heard it in the children's sermon, and it's one we seldom get to hear in church because it's usually scheduled for Reformation Sunday. It's the story of Zacchaeus. You remember that guy, short guy, tax collector, the guy everybody in town disliked. He climbs a tree to see Jesus go by, and Jesus sees him, invites himself over to Zacchaeus' house. And once they get there, Zacchaeus is a changed man. He's so honored that Jesus includes him, that he pledges to repay anyone he's cheated and to give away a huge chunk of his wealth. I mean, why would anybody do something that crazy? There's another Zacchaeus story, and you know it very well. We watch it over and over every Christmas time. It's called A Christmas Carol. You've heard of it, right? Scrooge is a business owner, and he underpays his employees and generally spends his life hoarding. One night he has a nightmare where he meets the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. He sees how his past greediness drove his wife and family away, what his current miserliness will do to people like the Cratchits and Tiny Tim. And then he sees what his legacy will be. He will die friendless and utterly forgotten. And he awakens Christmas morning and he realizes he still has time to change his legacy. And suddenly, every day is a gift. Every person a treasure. He becomes generous. He laughs a lot. Nobody had ever seen Scrooge laugh. And he gives the Cratchits a turkey and a raise. He becomes a benefactor and a mentor to Tiny Tim, a modern-day Zacchaeus story. Scrooge realizes that he doesn't own anything, not his money, not even his life. But as a steward, he does have a chance to make life better for his neighbors. And the surprise is, he finds pure joy in giving himself away. Isn't that weird? Last week we heard a little bit of Paul's first letter to Timothy. Today it was the second letter, and it was the part where he warned that the love of money is the root of all evil. We've always heard that. But then the part that comes right after that, he encourages Timothy and his congregation to be generous with the gifts God has given them. And in so doing, Paul says, take hold of the life that really is life. And it sounds to me kind of like the gift that Zacchaeus and Scrooge found. I had a teacher once who asked us, what do you want on your tombstone? It was a play on an old commercial. Do you remember that commercial? You know, pepperoni and mushroom, something like that, Tombstone pizzas. Anyway, sorry. But there was no pizza in the class for us. He made us write out our epitaphs. Some were clever, some were kind of trite. But I remember nobody in the group wanted to be remembered as a Scrooge. Nobody. We all wanted to be remembered as someone who was generous in some way, loving, caring. And we all hoped to live out our lives so that at least a few people would cry at our funeral. And the good news is, stewards get to live that way. We get to give ourselves away in service to our Master because everything we have is already a gift. And being a steward rather than the owner is one of the most deeply satisfying things in life. The old green hymnal, how many of you remember the old green hymnal? Okay, some of you do. If you're not familiar, it was the Lutheran hymnal for a long time, 30, 40 years. Anyway, the old green hymnal captured that sense of what it means to be a steward in a prayer that we repeated over and over every single week. And I don't know how many times I did it, but it kind of finally sunk in. And it goes like this, remember it? Blessed are you, O Lord our God, maker of all things. Through your goodness you have blessed us with these gifts. With them we offer ourselves to your service and dedicate our lives to the care and redemption of all that you have made, for the sake of him who gave himself for us, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I invite you to reflect on what God is calling us to do together as a church. We'll place our estimate of giving cards on the altar in 2 weeks, a sign of offering ourselves to God's mission in this community. And may we faithfully use our time and all that we've been given to serve our Lord and our neighbor. And when the time of accounting comes, may each of us hear our owner and Lord say, "Well done, good and faithful servant."